Hey everyone, Ashlyn here from Minister for Happiness. I hope you're having a super Sunday and welcome to this week's story time. So during the week I was trying to decide which story I was going to tell this week that would have an impact in the most wonderful way on your week ahead. And I wanted to pick a story that was really, something nice and easy and that had a lovely life lesson in it that you could bring into your week ahead. So the story I chose is one that I will read today because even though most of the stories, well, all the stories I tell are either from my experience or ones that I've read and written and spoke many times, I think sometimes you need to read a story to get the real essence of it across, and this is one of those stories. Also, it's one of the only stories that whenever I read it I cry or I get emotional for some reason. And I'm not somebody who cries easily, not that I'm void of emotion, it's just that I wouldn't be someone who's quick to cry, but for some reason this story does that to me. So look, if I do, you can have a laugh or whatever, or you can cry with me, whatever you choose, but hopefully I get through it. And this week's story is called A Teacher's Story. And the story is told of an elementary school teacher. Her name was Mrs. Thompson. And she stood in front of her 5th grade class on the very first day of school, and she told the children a lie. Like most teachers, she looked at her students and said that she loved them all the same. But that was impossible, because there in the front row, slumped in his seat, was a little boy named Teddy. Mrs. Thompson had watched Teddy the year before and had noticed that he didn't play well with other children, his clothes were messy, and he seemed to always be in need of a bath. And Teddy could be unpleasant. It got to a point where Mrs. Thompson actually took delight in using a big red marker to mark X's on Teddy's assignments and big F's at the top of his papers. At the school where Mrs. Thompson taught, they were required to review each of the children's past records, but she'd been putting Teddy's off until the end. However, when she reviewed his file, she was in for a big surprise. Teddy's 1st grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is a bright child and ready to laugh. He's ready to laugh. He does his work neatly and he has good manners. He is a joy to be around." His 2nd grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is an excellent student, well liked by his classmates, but he seems to be a little troubled because his mother is terminally ill and life at home is a bit of a struggle." His 3rd grade teacher wrote, "His mother's death has been hard on him. He tries to do his best, but his father doesn't show much interest at home, and life at home is difficult and affects him, and if steps aren't taken, it could be a disaster." Teddy's 4th grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is withdrawn and doesn't show much interest in school. He doesn't have any friends and sometimes he falls asleep in class." By now, Mrs. Thompson had realized the problem, and she was ashamed of herself. She felt even worse when her students brought presents that Christmas, and they were all nice and neatly wrapped in colourful paper with ribbons, of course except Teddy's. His present was clumsily wrapped in a brown paper bag. It was even worse when Mrs. Thompson opened the present in the middle of all of the other presents, and some of the children started to laugh. When she opened it, she found a rhinestone bracelet with some of the rhinestones missing. Half a bottle of perfume had also been put in there. She stifled all the children's laughter, though, when she exclaimed how pretty the bracelet was, and she put it on her hand and started to dab the perfume on her wrists. Teddy stayed after school that day just long enough to say something to Mrs. Thompson. He said, "Mrs. Thompson, today you smelt like my mom." After the children had left, she cried for at least an hour. On that very day, she quit teaching, reading and writing and arithmetic, and instead she began to teach children. Mrs. Thompson paid particular attention to Teddy. As she worked with him, his mind seemed to come alive. The more she encouraged him, the faster he responded. By the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the smartest children in the class, and despite her lie that she would love all the children the same, Teddy became her teacher's pet. A year later, she found a note under her door from Teddy, telling her that she was still the best teacher he had ever had in his whole life. 6 years went by, and before the year ended, she got another note from Teddy. He wrote that he had finished high school, second in his class, and she was still the best teacher he ever had in his whole life. 4 years after that, she got another letter, saying that while things had been tough at times, he'd stayed in school and stuck it out, and would soon graduate from college with highest honours. He assured Mrs. Thompson that she was still the best and favourite teacher that he ever had in his whole life. Then another 4 years passed, and yet another letter came. This time, he explained that after he got his bachelor degree, he decided to go a little further, and the letter explained that she was still his best and favourite teacher he ever had, but now his name was a little longer. The letter was signed Theodore F. Stollard, MD. The story doesn't end there though. You see, there was yet another letter that spring. Teddy said he'd met this girl and he was going to marry her. He explained that his father had died a couple of years previous, and he was wondering if Mrs. Thompson would agree to sit in the place at the wedding that was usually reserved for the mother of the groom. Of course, Mrs. Thompson did, and guess what? She wore the bracelet, the one with several rhinestones missing. And she made sure that she was wearing the perfume that Teddy remembered his mother wearing on the last Christmas they spent together. They hugged each other, and Teddy whispered in Mrs. Thompson's ear, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for believing in me. Thank you so much for making me feel important and showing me that I could make a difference." Mrs. Thompson, with tears in her eyes, whispered back. She said, "Teddy, you have it all wrong. You were the one who taught me that I could make a difference. I didn't know how to teach until I met you." So I held it together pretty well there, yeah. So there was a few moments, and those few moments obviously are because, you know, there's something in that story that speaks to me, and I'm sure there's something in that story that will speak to everybody who's listening and watching today. And I would encourage you to bring that lesson into your week, and, you know, to maybe, if someone's being difficult or not so nice to you, maybe there's something going on in the background. Maybe, like Teddy, they have somebody who's sick, or somebody who's not treating them well at home, or somebody that they're having a challenging time with. Maybe they're sick themselves. You know, we really never know what's going on in somebody's lives, you know. We don't know ourselves, not to mention somebody else. So just be patient with people and be kind to people, because you never know how you could be affecting them. And if you give somebody the opportunity, you know, even better than anything else, they might teach you something. So have a wonderful week. And for those of you who enjoy the stories, please like and share, and get other people to check in to Storytime every Sunday, because the worst that can happen is it will, you know, you get to hear a story and it might make your week a bit better. And for those of you who maybe live in Cork or in the Ballincollig area, my class that runs every week, the Happiness Project, is on in Essential Wellness in Ballincollig every Thursday night from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. if you'd like to come along and hear another story. All of the stories I do on Sunday Storytime are from my classes, so you'll always be hearing a new story. And also my book 21 Sleeps, which is available on Amazon, can also be purchased in Here's Health stores. So if you'd like to increase your story time in the week, come along to the classes or pick up the book. Until next week, have an absolutely wonderful week, and see you next Sunday.